Hello, everyone. Shayna Finkelstein from Coast to Coast Legal Aid of South Florida here. I'm a staff attorney who represents victims of crime in our family law unit. And I'm here today with two of our friends from Nancy J. Cotterman Center, who are here to present about some myths that you may have heard about sexual assault and some statistics that you might find interesting and some services that are offered to the community here. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to our friends Rachel and Desmond to introduce themselves and hopefully teach us some things that we haven't learned before. Thanks. Rachel?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us on. My name is Rachel Taggart, here with my colleague Desmond Fong from the Nancy J. Cotterman Center. We are the victim advocates at the Sexual Assault Treatment Center for Broward County. So to get started, we're going to talk about some myths that go along with sexual assault that some people think are true. So the first one that I wanted to touch on was that someone can consent to sex if they're under the influence of a substance such as drugs or alcohol. So this might seem obvious to some people that you cannot consent, which is a fact. You cannot consent if you are under the influence of drugs or alcohol. However, some people are not aware of this, and there are some states even that are trying to pass laws to make it so that the charges are less for perpetrators who sexually assault someone if they are under the influence of a substance. So one of the most recent examples would be Minnesota. They're trying to pass a law and possibly have already passed this law that makes it so that if a victim consumed a substance consensually, they decided to have a few drinks, and they are sexually assaulted that night, the charges are less for the perpetrator because they willingly consumed a substance. So, even though this may seem obvious to some people, there are still states that do not think of it the same way. So that's one of the first myths that we wanted to discuss. So bottom line is, if someone is under the influence, they cannot consent to having sex. And if they are taken advantage of, that would be sexual assault. The second one I wanted to discuss is, and this one seems really obvious too, but if someone is asleep, they cannot consent. We have seen cases like this at our center where someone is talking to an acquaintance or a friend, and maybe they've been flirting or talking back and forth, and then they fall asleep and they wake up with someone sexually assaulting them. So just wanted to lay that out there, that being asleep does not equal consent. Someone cannot be sleeping and give consent. It has to be a verbal and ongoing process. The second one is that if consent is given at first, but then changed later on, that is not consent either. So as I said, consent is ongoing. It's a process, it's a conversation. You can consent to one thing during, a sexual encounter and then not consent to something else that occurs. And at that point, if the, other party continues, once consent is taken away, the person says no, then it becomes sexual assault. So again, this seems like something that, oh yeah, that seems pretty obvious, right? Actually, there are some states that don't see it that way. So North Carolina, they recently passed a law if someone gives consent, they cannot withdraw it once a sexual encounter is, initiated. So that's, something to be aware of. And that's why I'm talking about it today. Here in Florida and, in many other states, if a sexual encounter is taking place, someone could say no, then it's no, and then it's sexual assault if the perpetrator continues. And still many people to this day think, oh, well, they said yes, so they continue. So just to make it black and white very clear, if someone says no, even if they initially said yes, if that person continues, it is assault, sexual assault. Okay. And then another very obvious one that we see in media and in the way that, some people treat victims is just that the assumption that by the way someone is dressed or the way that they are behaving, maybe flirting, being flirtatious, open, talkative, have a short skirt or, things like that, that the individual wants it. So that is a very, very common myth that we hear in TV shows, movies, the way that sometimes just victims are treated after a sexual assault occurs. People will ask them, well, what were you wearing? Or where were you? Why were you there? Questioning the victim's actions or behaviors as opposed to questioning why the perpetrator did what they did. Because at the end of the day, if someone is walking down the street, even if they're completely naked, that is not consent. If they are to be sexually assaulted, they did not ask for it. So that's one that is extremely common that we hear all the time. And even with some of our survivors that come in, law enforcement on occasion will sometimes, question them and like, well, what were you wearing? Why did you do the things that you did that night? But at the end of the day, it's the assailant's behaviors and actions that led to the person coming in and reporting what happened. So
I agree. It's important to hold the abuser accountable. I think
right.
That's very important. Yeah. Can't agree more.
Yeah. So we see that very, very often. And the last myth that I wanted to touch on was that most sexual assaults are done by strangers, which could not be farther from the truth. I believe it's 93% are either acquaintances, friends, family members even, and it's only about 7% that are done by strangers.
Which can make it really hard to come forward because, of your relationship to the person.
Exactly. Some people don't want to get there, especially if it is a family member, if it's like an uncle, if it's, a close friend even, they're like, try to justify their actions. Oh, well, they're not normally like this, or they're a good person most of the time. I don't want to get them in trouble, or even they're scared to report because of what their friends or family members would think. Well, he's a great person, now you're ruining his reputation. There's just so much that comes along with that. But yeah, most of the time it is done by someone that the victim knows. So those are some of the most common myths that we see, at our center when we have victims come in. A lot of things that, we see in pop culture, the media, the news, some of the things that are most prevalent.
Okay. And I just want to add really quickly. So the North Carolina law that states that, consent can't be withdrawn once a sexual activity has started. Thankfully, the same year that it was brought to light in the media was the same year that the governor signed a new order and signed into law that consent could actually be revoked. So thankfully, they changed it. But the question, we all have to ask ourselves is, why did it take to 2019 to change that law? They were the only state left out of all 50 states up at that point to even have that on their books as a law stating that consent could not be withdrawn once something starts. So that's just something to keep in mind. I wanted to go a little bit into some recent statistics. So some of these numbers may seem a little high and a little scary, but there's a reason for it, and I'll explain a little bit why. So when it comes to the FBI's Uniform Crime Report, one person is sexually assaulted every 4 minutes and 20 seconds, but that's only taking into account reported incidents. So we know that there's going to be a vast majority of victims out there that just never report. And that is actually reflected in the National Crime Victimization Survey. As of 2018, their numbers are 1 person every 43 seconds, just based on self-reported surveys. If you take the rolling average of that data of the past 5 years from 2019 backwards, it's 1 person every 73 seconds. So that's going to be the statistic that's usually quoted the most often. Just keep in mind that's a rolling average of the past 5 years. In Broward County alone, according to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, as of 2019, in the year 2019, 688 rapes were reported in Broward County alone. And as Rachel said, in 8 out of those 10 cases, the survivor knew the perpetrator. So that kind of reflects that it's always someone that you know, someone that's closer to you than you think. As Rachel said, the media tends to portray that it's usually a stranger because that seems to be the most sensational thing, but just know that that's not always the case. And in terms of human trafficking, Florida ranks 3rd in the United States, just behind California and Texas. So the 3 things they have in common are we're the coastal states. So, and we're close to borders. So that's kind of the underlying issue there. When it comes to child abuse statistics, about 700,000 children are abused in the United States annually, and that's per the National Children's Alliance. So the next 2 stats I'm going to mention are kind of like the surprising numbers to me when I started doing some research on it. So the latest numbers I could find were as of 2015, and I'm sure in the next couple of years, there'll be newer numbers that hopefully will reflect a difference. But as of 2015, 43.2% of females experienced their first sexual abuse incident before they turn age 18. And for males, it's 51.3. So the whole statistic that you hear out there of 1 in 4 girls and one in 6 boys, has completely changed since that statistic was first announced. So now it's like 40%. That's 4 out of 10 girls and 1 in 2 boys that get sexually assaulted before age 18. And every 9 minutes, Child Protective Services substantiates a claim of child sexual abuse as of 2018. And in the fiscal year of 2019 to 2020, the Florida Department of Children and Families investigated 11,516 child abuse reports just for Broward County alone. So that number is actually a little bit lower than previous years, just simply because COVID hit. So that kind of changed the reporting and the visibility of kids, especially kids not being in school. But as far as those numbers go for the abuse that happens before they turn 18, one possible reason is because there's more awareness out there and more people are actually reporting certain things or disclosing even, not necessarily reporting. The fact that they're disclosing that this has happened is actually showing and bringing awareness that this is out there. It's not so much of a hidden thing anymore. So I think this is a good thing, honestly, because the more we bring awareness to it and the more that people feel comfortable talking about this topic and bringing it to the attention of either someone that they trust or law enforcement or a child protective investigator, this is only going to help in the long run, because then the ultimate goal is just to reduce these numbers. And, obviously in an ideal society, we get them down to 0, but the lower we go, the better off we're going to be. But all these numbers tend to usually spike before they come back down. And that's just simply because there's an awareness issue that's happening. So that's kind of the goal that the Nancy J. Cotterman Center is striving for, is bringing awareness and having this be a conversation that people talk about, so it's out there. So speaking of which, I would like to mention some of the services that we offer. So Rachel and I are part of the crisis unit, which is kind of like the frontline staff. So if law enforcement brings in a survivor of sexual assault, or even if a sexual assault survivor wants to come in to do a non-reporting or just talk about their options, we're the people that they're meeting with first and foremost. We're open 24/7, so they can call anytime on our helpline if they want information or assistance. That number is 761-7273. And we provide forensic medical examinations, which are done by advanced practice registered nurses. We provide also counseling services in-house. We have a counseling unit that's an excellent counseling unit. Their specialty is dealing with nothing but sexual violence type cases and also child abuse cases. So we do offer counseling services for children that have went through abuse in their life. And not only that, we also offer those services to non-offending family members that might be affected, because we recognize that if you're a victim of either sexual assault or abuse of any kind, it's not just you that's affected. It could be your immediate family members that get affected by it as well. So those services are available also. So those are some of the, it's kind of a snapshot of the services we provide. But if anyone needs any kind of assistance or knows anyone that could use our help, that's been a victim of sexual assault or someone that's just has a question, they can call us anytime on that 24-hour number I provided. And again, that's 954-761-7273.
We really don't know what we would do without you guys. Nancy J. Cotterman Center here at Legal Aid, you know, sometimes we're trying to represent those victims in court, but we all know that's not where the battle ends as a survivor. And I don't know what we would do if we didn't have friends like you to refer people to. So thank you so much for the work you do in the community. That was very informative. I'm sure that everybody learned a lot. I know I learned some things. And again, there's going to be information down in the comments about their website and their address and the phone number again. So again, thanks for joining us here today, both the people watching and also our friends over at Nancy J. Cotterman. And we hope to see you guys next Friday for our next Friday with Friends. Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.